Hi, you're listening to the Professional Speaks podcast with me, Craig McKellar, your host. As an ex-Big Four auditor for 6 years, I now run a specialist recruitment consultancy called McKellar Consulting. Throughout this podcast, I speak to senior leaders from the professional services community, past, present and future. These leaders work in accounting and finance, audit, tax, corporate finance, consulting, legal and investments. In the comfort of their own office, I will be posing questions to our guests to gain insights from them across a variety of topics, including balancing work and life, mental health and mindset, risk-taking, and effective leadership. These insights will help us learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what we want to achieve in our careers. Here's what's coming up on today's episode.
It just goes to show what you can do if you try something out, I suppose, and you start looking at how to do things well in terms of, maybe selling or businesses, or how to make money with small audiences, or whatever it is. Basically, there's an awful lot you can learn how to do, because I just did it all through podcasts, internet, and books. Basically, I didn't pay for anything for the first 3 years that I was doing this. Really, it's only since then that I've paid for some things to try and help me get better quicker, or grow it quicker, let's say.
In this episode, I'm joined by Jack Bonehill, who is an Employment Tax Director at PKF Smith Cooper, which is an independent UK accounting firm, part of the PKF network. In this episode, Jack tells us more about how he manages being a tax advising leader and hosting a podcast as his side hustle. Hi Jack, it's great to have you on the Professional Speaks podcast today. I know we've chatted over the last couple of years, so it's great to have you on today. For listeners and viewers who don't know of you, you are an Employment Tax Director currently at PKF Smith Cooper, which is an independent UK accounting firm, part of the PKF accounting network, and you are also, if I can say, famously a podcast host of the Tax Professionals podcast, which has been growing and going strong for over 5 years now.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me, Craig. It's nice to join on someone else's podcast for a change and be interviewed rather than be the interview for a change.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. And if there's any tax professionals listening who don't know of your podcast, we will be discussing it, and you should definitely check it out. So I like to start off for all guests on here, just to give people a flavour of who the individual is. So it'd be great to hear just a bit about you, your background, your upbringing, things like that.
Yeah. Let's go back to, I suppose, upbringing then a bit, because I think that's probably a little bit different, isn't it, to what I suppose people would typically share in the professional world, let's say. I didn't come from any rich or middle class background or anything like that, nor a poor one really. It was in the middle. We had holidays and stuff as kids, nothing. I think I did 2 abroad holidays as a kid, so we were just, I suppose, a normal family really. I'm one of 3 children, the oldest one, so the one that they make all the mistakes on first, and then they're better off for the ones that come around. And my sister, who's the youngest, is definitely the most spoilt because she's the only girl and the youngest, I think. So there's that there. I didn't particularly try in school, let's say. So I suppose I was naturally okay at some things, like maths, for example. I was always naturally good at science. I was naturally good at English. I was terrible at. So I actually failed GCSE English first time round and got a D the first time I sat that. I then managed to scrape a C second time round, which was always the one thing that annoyed me about school, because I felt like I could have done better than that, but whatever the circumstances were at the time, it just didn't work out for me. There's kind of a switch, I think, that flipped in my head at some point. It was when I went to college, because in my mind I was going to college out of choice and wasn't being forced to do it anymore like school. And I thought, if I'm going to choose to spend my time doing this, then I want to use that time well. So I went in wanting to put a lot of effort in, basically. But the first few kind of assignments I had in my A-levels, I ended up failing a few of them, which was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because I'd picked subjects that I was naturally good at, but being naturally good at them anymore wasn't enough. But then I ended up putting in, I suppose, a bunch more effort, figuring out how to actually study, because I'd never really done that in school, off my own back, didn't really revise any of those things. So I had to learn that skill, and I ended up doing pretty well in college at the end. So I ended up getting an A star in maths, an A in accounting, which I suppose has ended up leading on to some extent me working in tax. But I also did a BTEC in music technology. I played guitar as a kid, not to any good standard by any means, but I did play it, and I played a little bit of drums here and there and too. So that was I chose my A levels and stuff based on one thing I enjoyed, which was the music side. One thing I thought I was good at, which was maths and accounting, which I thought would help for career prospects. I then made a decision to do a maths degree, which was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and I think I'll never do anything more difficult than that ever again. It made me feel really stupid in like the first 6 weeks of being there because I was just surrounded by people that were really, really smart. And one of my best friends from uni in the end was just so natural at maths. Like he understood it, understood everything in the lectures, gave me a bunch of help afterwards. And I used to sit there in the lectures like, what on earth are they talking about in this? Like I had to go away and really work hard to understand what they were talking about. But I think what that did is it put me in a good position when I got to work in terms of like how to put effort in, how to be determined, persevere, all that type of thing. So that by the time I was working, kind of learnt those skills, and I think they really helped a lot in my early years of my career.
No, that's really interesting. And was were your parents or anyone else kind of good at maths, or was it you the odd one out?
It's kind of the thing that everyone in the family is better at, let's say, than English. Like I don't think any of us are an English family. Well, not in terms of we weren't brought up in England because we all were, but in terms of the subject, it's not like the strength in our family. I mean, I look at some of the WhatsApp messages with my dad nowadays, and I can't even understand what he's talking about. Like honestly, like it makes no sense to me or my wife sometimes. So yeah, I'd say naturally better at maths. My brother had the same struggles as me with English. My sister didn't know, but my sister did read a lot as a kid. Yeah, I think we've just got more of a logical problem solving brain than
Mhm.
a wordy descriptive brain, let's say.
And am I right that you're from Birmingham?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, to actually the Black Country, so I was brought up in Dudley, which is technically separate to Birmingham. And I don't think that helped actually, side note, because the way that we speak in the Black Country, which I don't really speak like that much anymore because of, I suppose, the clients and stuff I speak to that have no idea what I'm talking about. The way that we say things, like it's not, we say words in the way that they're not spelt, like not even close, like, and we say some things that are like really weird in terms of grammar and things like that. So it was hard to learn how to, I suppose, speak or write properly. Let's say more of the Queen's English. I mean, I'm still nowhere near that, of course, because I've still got my roots. But I've had to work hard to like write and to speak in a more professional way because it's not something that came naturally to me at all. Being brought up in the Black Country.
I mean, the UK is full of regions with their own dialect and slang. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people listening to this can probably relate. Just touching on that though, was it working in the corporate world? Is that how you learned to maybe speak differently, whether it was slowly or just articulating yourself with better words, or was it something else?
Think it was mainly university for me. I went to Birmingham University, and there's a lot of people I think that go there that come from like privately educated backgrounds. So I was surrounded by more people that spoke, let's say, quote unquote, proper English. So I think that helped for sure. And actually, before I went to uni, I kind of realised that my written English wasn't up to scratch. So I spent quite a lot of time between college and university, like actually working on that. I actually started reading some books. I'd never chosen to read a book off my own back before until then. So I was 18 before I voluntarily read a book. That helped, but I was kind of doing it in like analysing pretty much like every paragraph, every sentence, every word used to just try and learn from it. Really, it wasn't there for pleasure for me. It was there as like a pure learning exercise, let's say.
That's really interesting. Not something that we've spoken about before, so I just thought I'd ask a bit more about it. So obviously doing a maths degree probably opens up the door to lots of different paths, for your career. So I guess the main question is, how did you, get into the world of tax and I guess employment tax to be more specific?
Yeah, this one day when I was walking back to the train station after a day at uni, I walked kind of through this communal area, and they had like some guides around careers, like just on the side. And the two I picked up were tax, and the other one was actuarial work. I actually wanted to be, after reading those things, I preferred the idea of an actuary. I like the idea of tax, but I preferred the idea of being an actuary. But because I got my C and GCSE English, that made it borderline. Well, it like over halved my opportunity straight away because most of them wanted at least a B to even like apply, basically. So that cut them in half. I wasn't willing to move, and most of the jobs are in London for that, not Birmingham. And so the ones that were left, I was basically just not successful with at the time. And so I pursued my second choice, I suppose, which was tax. And actually, for probably a good 3.5, 4 years, I kept thinking, do I want to move to be an actuary instead? Do I want to be an actuary instead? And it was only really when I became CTA qualified and I thought, I'm not going through any of that again, like with the studying and learning, that I kind of became more at peace with it. What I liked, though, about the idea of tax was being client facing. I quite like speaking to people and helping people, so I like the sound of that. I actually wanted the challenge of doing something a bit more English based, so I knew there'd be a lot of law in tax, and that was something with me struggling with English as a kid that I kind of wanted to try and get better at rather than just go down the maths route again because I'd kind of been there, done that then with the degree type thing. And I suppose just I wanted something that had like a lot of thinking in it, a lot of complex thoughts, that type of thing, because I enjoyed that element of my degree, and I thought kind of tax was a good mixture of those things. So I just felt like it would work for me, and I felt like I would enjoy, large elements of it, which it's turned out to be true.
And coming on to that, what does your job entail? Employment tax director.
Yeah, so it's more than what I would have thought it would have entailed back then. I thought you'd literally just be turning up every day, talking to a few clients, telling them about tax, and kind of going home, which I think is pretty much true up until about manager grade, I would say. Senior manager is where it starts to have the most significant change, I think. So you start having more of a focus on winning work at that point, I would say, which kind of ramps up when you get to director level. And I think at director level as well, you've got a bit more of like a leadership element. So you're not just running a team, but you're potentially like giving it direction and trying to think of strategy and just making sure that everything's running smoothly. So my job nowadays is it's about 50% working on clients, but that's not necessarily client faced anymore because I might be supporting the team who are working on the client jobs instead. So I've got a bit more of like a back office role sometimes now on that. It's setting like the strategy for the team and trying to make it run effectively. And it's pretty much keeping clients happy and bringing on board new clients, which is probably the most difficult job for someone with like the skill set of a natural tax person because we're not salespeople at all. And it's completely, I would say, unnatural to us.
I mean, we don't need to go too much into it, but your approach to, I guess, winning work and winning clients or talking to clients, maintaining relationships. Like you say, you're not a salesy person, and maybe sometimes when we think of a salesy person, we might think of a car salesman or something like that. How do you approach sales, as it were, in the professional world?
Yeah, it's probably almost like the complete opposite way to what people would think of when they think of sales. I'm very kind of honest and upfront and a bit of an open book, really, which I have actually been criticised for in my career, which is a completely different point. But that's the approach that I take. So whenever I'm talking to like current clients or prospects, I'm very honest with them. My kind of thing that I'm big on now is telling real stories to clients that might have happened with other clients or have just happened over the course of my career, but trying to tell them in a more interesting way so that they are not only, I suppose, taking the point, but they're actually like enjoying, say, and having the chat with me. So then really, I just want people to want to work with me, I suppose. That's pretty much the aim that I have, is I want people to work with me. So I just focus purely on building kind of good, honest, open relationships with people. So pretty much every client I come across, that's my aim. Like I don't really do much external BD. I don't feel there's a need to at the moment. I'm sure that will change at some point in the future, but it's very much on whenever I speak to someone, potential client or potential referrer or an actual client or whatever, then it's literally just about, yeah, I suppose being honest and open, but also showing them or letting them know what we can do to help in a soft way, in a way that's helpful to them and not buy this off me because it's going to do X, Y, and Z. It's more of a this is how this can help you. We can help you with that. This is what we can do to help.
Yeah, so just kind of being clear around that, and I mean, you'll have plenty of practice speaking to people with your podcast, which has been going strong for nearly 5 years now. So, kind of just coming on to that, how did it start? Why did you start it? I guess would be the two main questions.
Yeah, the non-flashy answer is I started it to see if I could make a side hustle, one that actually made some money outside of work. I kind of went through stages, really. Me and my wife are very tight. We don't really spend much money, so we had savings, and I wanted to do something with those savings. So I looked into investing. And when I was looking into investing, I came across the concept of a side hustle. Like I'd actually never heard of it before. So I was probably like 23, 24 before I'd even heard of the concept of a side hustle, which probably makes me sound like I live under a rock a bit. But that's the truth. And then when I got onto the topic of side hustles, I just kind of became hooked on it. It was almost like a challenge for me to see if I could make one that worked. The first one I tried was making YouTube videos on tax topics. I made two. They were both between like 5 and 10 minutes long, and they took me probably somewhere between 15 and 30 hours to make. So I quickly realised that that was an awful lot of time and effort, which I didn't really have, and it's going to take me a long time to monetize that in some way. So I kind of dropped that. And then at the start of the pandemic, one of the podcasters I was listening to at the time, it's called the Smart Passive Income Podcast. They had courses to like help you start a side business or to start a business in general. And at the start of COVID, he made that course free, the hosted, called Platfilling. And so I just enrolled in it, and I went through that course, which kind of talked you through like, you know, what are you good at, what do you like doing, all those type of things, and kind of trying to get the intersection between it. So I felt like I could help people, even if I was just a few years in front of them in the tax world, because I'd kind of been there, done that. I had my music tech background, so I knew kind of how to edit audio and do all that type of thing. And so I just gave it a go from there, really. I mean, I was pretty worried about how people might perceive it, to be fair, but I kind of got to that point. I was like, if I don't do it, I'm going to lose out more so than if I don't try and do it. I didn't want to just kind of live a life where I wasn't doing things because people might judge me type thing. So it just started there, really. It started off with not many listeners at all, as I suppose is always the case with these type of things. But I just kept putting time and effort into it, trying to find out ways to grow it, trying to find out ways to make it better, more enjoyable, more helpful for people. And it kind of just spiraled from there, really.
Did you get feedback quite early on from, you know, when you started it, or maybe before you started it, you know, did you ask tax professionals you knew, you know, for their thoughts on your idea?
Yeah, because of that course, actually, I very much did test the concepts, if that makes sense. So I reached out to a bunch of people to see whether they thought the idea would be good, whether people would actually listen, and what I could do to like tweak it and refine it, that type of thing. So I did do that, which definitely helped a lot, to be fair. It kind of reinforced the fact that it would work, but I just needed to make sure that I targeted it right in the end. I had a few messages from people early on that had kind of found it in its early days and sent me like really nice messages about like how it had helped them and how they thought it was really cool in some circumstances. And so those kind of few messages that I had in the early days really did almost encourage me to keep going in a way, because the second I realized that there was actually people listening, like real people listening, and it was actually helping them, that was the difference between me thinking this is just me sitting in my bedroom essentially recording the podcast to this can actually help people, and if I can do this right now, maybe I can make something of it type thing.
Yeah, no, that's really good. You know, similar to what I did, you know, find out if there's a need for it. And you know, I had done a side hustle when I was auditing, which was set up a shirt business. I don't know if I've chatted to you about that before, but you know, I monetized that, but I monetized it, I guess, without making a profit. So got money for the products, but overall really didn't make a profit. You know, took loans out, etc. You know, it's one of the reasons I left accounting was, you know, doing 60, 65 hours. I thought if I did 40, 45 hours somewhere else, I had 15, 20 hours to do, you know, a side hustle. What could I achieve? And, you know, like you, I just thought, let's just go for it. So that's really interesting. And so monetizing it, you know, how did you monetize it? I think, you know, I would think, does that mean you were getting advertising revenue because your numbers were at a certain number, or is it something else?
Yeah, so the first thing I tried actually, which is I was thinking about this earlier, it sounds really weird, but my first idea was to start a book club for tax professionals. So reading books that were like going to help us in our career in some way, talk about it and go away. And I thought we can do this once a month and I can charge a fee for it. So I ended up going with, I think it was £10 now from memory, £10 to have like an evening a week, an evening a month where we'd go through a book that we've all read and we'd talk about it. So I kind of sent emails around and stuff to people in my audience, etc. And getting that first sale, even though it was like £10, was like quite a happy moment in a way, because it was like, I've got one person. If I can get one, surely I can get more.
Yeah.
So by the time we had the first book club session, there was, I think, 10 people that had kind of enrolled. 5 of them though had already dropped out before the first session or something like that. So there's like 5 of us on it, and then I think some people ended up not turning up anyway. So there's only like 4 of us on the call in the end, 4 or 5 of us. But I did that for probably like 6 months before I realised that obviously the money here is small because I'm only charging £10 a time. There's clearly not that much interest because I had, let's say, 500 people on my email list at that point, and I got 4 people in it. So it proved the concept for me, and it was the start of me thinking I can maybe the monetization, this is more tangible than just like a dream now, let's say. And I ended up having one of my guests on my podcast that helped with CTA exams. At the time, they were kind of selling some services to help students. And if people ended up buying their services as a result of me, they were giving me a slice. And that was the first time where I started getting like a more sizable income, let's say, from it. So I think in like a year, that was like 6K or something, which I know is not huge money. But considering this is like a thing outside of work, like to me, that was like insane that I was getting like 6K a year from it. But I was very reliant on other.
I was just going to ask him what level were you at work? You say 6K doesn't sound a lot, but actually, well, might have been quite significant, with the salary that you were getting at the time.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I think I started the podcast when I was assistant manager, and then probably in about 6 months I was manager. So I'm gonna say manager at that point in time. So
Yeah,
probably earning somewhere between like somewhere around the 50K mark, probably
yeah,
at work at that point.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was that. But the main thing that has been my kind of income stream from it is creating courses purely for people who work in tax. So I've got my 2 favourite courses, which are the Tax Research Masterclass, which teaches people how to use tax legislation, guidance, case law to find the answer to any tax question, basically. And I've got the Tax Advice Masterclass, which helps people actually give good advice to clients and not just what tax people think is good tax advice, basically.
Hmm.
And those are definitely the 2 biggest income streams for sure. I have had sponsorship, which is the typical one that people think of, but with numbers for like my listenership, which at the moment is around 600 to 700 in the first 90 days of an episode, like typical sponsorship income is like £50 per 1,000 listeners or something like that. So that's obviously low. So I've never gone down that route, but I've ended up going to a few tax recruiters who have been willing to sponsor for more than that because they've got the prize of placing someone that listens and comes to them through the podcast. So yeah, it's been a few different income streams. The only ones that I really have now are the courses. That's the thing I solely focus on because it's the thing I enjoy the most. And with limited time, I just wanted to keep it simple rather than make it too complicated.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So you saw that these courses being quite successful. Your numbers of listeners were growing. Is that what you hoped it to be, the podcast to be, or would you say it's quite a different thing now than you imagined?
Yeah, it's really hard to go back and think what you were thinking like 4 or 5 years ago. So I really can't remember what I would have thought was good back then. I think it might have been if I could get 10K a year from it, then that would be good. But that point in time, I was working 5 days a week and doing this purely in the evenings and weekends. So I think it would have probably been that then. It's surpassed that, but I have also gone down to 4 days a week as a tax advisor. So I do 4 days on that and 1 day on the podcast slash everything that's connected to it, let's say. So I always just refer to it as the podcast business, but obviously the training isn't a podcast.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's surpassed that. And I think really it just goes to show like what you can do if you try something out, I suppose, and you start looking at how to do things well in terms of, maybe selling or businesses or how to like make money with small audiences or whatever it is. Basically, like there's an awful lot you can learn how to do because I just did it all through podcasts, internet, and books. Basically, like I didn't pay for anything for like the first 3 years that I was doing this. Really, it's only since then that I've paid for some things to try and help me get better quicker or grow it quicker, let's say.
Mhm. Yeah, I think people. I think some people can have the wrong perception that a side hustle, doing something on top of your work, it means you're not going to do your current day job well, and you're going to be distracted, and you're going to be you won't have enough energy for it. But I think I would argue against that and say exactly what you said, which is that you can learn a lot from doing a side hustle. Going back to what I said about with my shirt business. I didn't do an art, a design degree or anything like that. I hadn't sold anything online before. There's so much that I learned that has helped me in my day job now. And I think, you need to have the right support around you. And I guess, I'm assuming your old employer and your current employer are very supportive of the podcast that you do. And, that's why they kind of allow you to do the 4 days in the job as well.
Yeah, well, I've definitely learned a lot of things from doing the podcast that have definitely helped with being a tax advisor. I'm way better at public speaking now, let's say, because I suppose you train that skill a lot when you're talking into a microphone.
That could be the next thing you monetize. If anyone's listening and wants you to go and talk at an event.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, keynotes or something. I've had that idea at some point, but I don't even know how you really get into that. And I'm more focused on the course at the moment. But yeah, definitely speaking, storytelling. I've spent an awful lot of time learning how to tell stories better on the podcast so that people will want to come back and listen again, but also learn stuff from the stories at the same time. So that's directly translated into helping me to speak to clients and, let's say, quote unquote, sell services to them. So that's helped massively there. I mean, just kind of the whole thought process around pricing and quoting and just winning work. Like, I've had to do that through the podcast to make any money through the side hustle. And again, that definitely directly translates to working in tax. But I also think it's given me a different perspective on the tax world. So I think the tax world is quite old fashioned as a whole, I would say. Mm-hmm. And doing something like a podcast, which is like much more modern, let's say, and kind of the techniques and the strategies that I'm using through the podcast, I don't think really many people at all would touch that in the tax world. So it's definitely helped me to bring like a more modern perspective to the tax world. And I think that's probably something that I would be criticised for again by some people, like trying to do things a bit differently to others. But to me, like, I think the tax industry as a whole needs modernising quite a lot. And I think anything that gets us away from the traditional stuff that people are just doing because it's always been done like that, the better for me. Like, I don't like the status quo unless like the status quo is clearly the best way to do it. I like to try and think of, no, we've got this is the way it's being done now. Can it be done better? Is there anything different that we can do? And I've learned a bunch of things through the podcast that's helped with that.
Great. No, that's really helpful to know, and makes a lot of sense. So, and for people listening, hopefully that will be good advice for them. With side hustles, juggling it with your day job can obviously be quite challenging and difficult. Have you found aspects of it quite challenging, stressful, draining?
Yeah, it's been very difficult at numerous points. Initially, when I first started off, I was spending about 5 hours outside of work on the podcast. I didn't want to overdo it because I didn't want to just burn myself out, basically. Mm-hmm. But when I went down to 4 days, I started spending about 12 hours a week on it. The thing that I think I find most difficult is in my role now as a tax advisor, as a tax director, there is an element of winning work to it. And it's quite a heavy element, I would say. And running the side hustle, there's also a heavy element of sales there to get people on my courses, basically. And having like essentially two different roles where there's a sales element, which is not something I'm natural at and is not the bit I enjoy, definitely takes it out of me. And it's made me question quite a few times whether I want to continue doing it. I went through a stage last year where I felt stressed pretty much all day, every day for like 2 months straight. Like even weekends, evenings outside of work, I just felt stressed all the time. And this one day I was on the train on the way back from work, and my neck just felt like so tensed up and tight and heavy. And I just came home that day and I was like, I'm not doing anything on the podcast this evening. Like, I just cannot do it anymore. So I just thought, I'm just going to take a few days off. That few days ended up turning into a break from the podcast, which was definitely well needed at the time because I was just doing too much, basically. And so I think I found a bit more of a better balance now. So at the moment, I'm only spending Wednesdays on the podcast. I don't do anything really on evenings or weekends anymore. Just to try and get the balance back a bit more. And also with the things I am doing on the podcast, I'm trying to do things that I enjoy more than just doing things because it's going to make it, let's say, more successful or grow or more money. So I think chasing those things kind of as just an arbitrary goal doesn't contribute to happiness or anything like that. I think it probably ends up doing the opposite. So I'm trying to focus more now on what do I enjoy. So I enjoy recording episodes, for example. I enjoy speaking to guests. I enjoy delivering the courses. So I'm trying to do as much as that as possible, basically. And I'm doing similar things in my role as a tax director. I'm trying to focus on the elements of the job that I enjoy more, so that I get more, let's say, fulfillment and enjoyment from it, and not just whatever success means type thing.
Yeah, yeah, no. Yeah, again, that's understandable. I think over time things evolve. We go in with a mindset to achieve some things, and then we can get burnt out from it or tired, and so we reflect, we change things, and maybe improve things. So it's good to hear that you feel you've got more of a balance now, and you can still make produce quality at work, produce quality in the podcast as well. Years before you become director, just go back to your day job. I believe you won a Tolley's Tax Award for Rising Star. Can you say just a bit about that? I know we've maybe only got 5 minutes or so, but would you mind saying just something about that? And did it help in your career going forward? Just for people listening who might think about applying for maybe an award at some point in the future.
Yeah. So the main reason I applied for it was because I thought if I could even be shortlisted for that award, then it would help get more eyes on the podcast. That was the main reason behind it. I mean, I did think about the ego thing a bit and thought it'd be nice to win it, etc. But that really wasn't the main driver behind it. So I just put myself forwards, ended up winning it, which in the moment was really nice. Having the award handed out on stage and this, that, and the other, and kind of the congratulations and stuff that I received afterwards. But really after that, I haven't really used it much. Maybe that's my mistake, but I definitely use it when I'm selling my courses, because to potentially a tax partner that's, let's say, in their 40s or 50s, looking to pay for training for their staff. Like, if they just see me as this young bloke that's 30 years old, like, it's on paper not that credible for them. Whereas if they can see that I've won the Rising Star Award, they can see that I've done all these other things and everything. It's kind of part of the puzzle of building my credibility, I think, with people. I do not use it at all in my role as a tax director. I never mention it to clients. It's just not something I think they'll even understand, to be honest, because, like, one, do they even know who Tolleys are? Probably not. Do they know that the taxation awards are like a prestigious award ceremony in the tax industry? Probably not. Even more so nowadays, because award like things are cropping up everywhere. There's literally an award for everything nowadays, isn't there?
Yeah.
So and I think the perception of that market is that people pay to win these awards as well. So I just think in terms of clients, they're not going to see it as a pro really that much. It's more, I think they'd more so see it as a brag more than anything.
Yeah.
So I just don't mention it to them. So it's hard to say really how much benefit it's had, because I don't know whether people who have ended up coming on my training have come on it because of that, whether it's topped them over the edge or not. But I just think it's something that helps me build credibility with people, and I think it's helped people know who I am, so I get my foot in the door more than what I otherwise would have done, basically.
Yeah, no, that's helpful and good for people to listen to and have a think. Know why you're going to get it, and like you say, it's not something you're really going to want to shove in the face of clients. It's probably going to send the wrong message, but it does add to your credibility. It's something that you can have in the background that you've achieved. As an achievement. So it's great to have it. Just as we're wrapping up the podcast as well, I always like to ask guests about the next 12 months. So, do you have any goals, any personal or professional goals?
This moment in time, I actually don't. It's like the first time ever that I'm not kind of going, in 12 months, I want this to happen. Because yes, goals are helpful, but I think they also can cause stress and anxiety and a bunch of bad emotions when you overdo it. And because I've given myself so many goals over like the past 9 years or so, particularly in the last 4 or 5 when I've done the podcast, like, I think it's contributed to that burnout and the stress that I had. So my more arbitrary goal now is to enjoy the podcast more, enjoy work more, enjoy life more, and kind of be driven more by that, rather than I want to be partnered by X dates, or I want the podcast to have 1,000 listeners by this date, or I want to make X amount of money through the podcast. Like, I've just removed all of those kind of goals for now. I mean, I'm sure I'll bring them back at some point, but for me at the moment, not wanting to quit is more important than growing, if that makes sense. And I think if I get to that point where I'm just not enjoying this or my work as a tax director, then I'm just not going to do as good anymore, and that's just going to like stagnate me permanently, say, or for a longer period of time. So yeah, It's probably not the typical answer you get. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would like to become partner as soon as possible, and that's definitely on my radar. But I'm not set it as like I want to achieve this by this date. It's just me kind of working towards it bit by bit, whilst I suppose keeping enjoyment in my tax and podcast roles.
I mean, there's guests on this podcast that some have a plan and they stick to it and they get to where they want to get to. Some don't have a plan and they still, achieve a lot, and they're focused on the here and now and delivering, quality, etc. Looking after themselves outside of work, which can help you in work. So it sounds like you've got that mindset. So, it's refreshing to hear, and nothing wrong with what you've said at all. So, good. It sounds like you're in a good place, and hopefully the podcast can keep growing. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, there's listeners who would like to check out your podcast, and they should, or your courses on your website, or even to contact you on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'd be happy to receive any messages.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, for what it's worth, as one just last comment, like I think there's pros and cons to both the plans and the goals versus none. But I think the main problem with goals is that people set goals that don't really connect with what they want out of work. So they might have an arbitrary goal like, I want to be a partner. Well, why do you want to be a partner? Do you actually want to be a partner, or what are the reasons for it? So I think goals can be good and bad. I mean, if you set a goal to be a partner, you're more likely to get it quicker for sure, but you might get there and not be in the place that you actually want to be in, like as a whole. So I think there's definitely pros and cons to both, and I've done both, and setting goals definitely help you achieve things quicker. But is it an empty achievement, or is it an achievement that is actually going to make you feel fulfilled, or is going to contribute to your life improving in some way?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's been great having you on as a guest.
Yeah, thank you. It's been good to come on and talk about all things podcasts, childhood, and tax.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you for listening to the Professional Speaks podcast. This podcast was produced by Springwood Studio Productions. Remember, you can watch the episode recording on our YouTube channel, and if you can, please do subscribe and share with all of your friends. The more people who listen to this, the more guests we can have on to share, so that you can learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what you want to achieve in your career. Please also contact me if you have any feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear from you.